Story 16. The Deliverers. After Joshua died, the Israelites disobeyed God. They did not obey God's laws, and they did not drive out the rest of the Canaanites from the Promised Land. The Israelites began to worship the Canaanite gods instead of Yahweh, the true God. The Israelites had no king, so everyone did what they thought was right for themselves. By disobeying God, the Israelites started a pattern that repeated several times. The pattern went like this. The Israelites would disobey God for several years. Then He would punish them by allowing their enemies to defeat them. These enemies would steal things from the Israelites, destroy their property, and kill many of them. Then after Israel's enemies oppressed them for many years, the Israelites would repent of their sin and ask God to rescue them. Each time the Israelites repented, God would rescue them. He did this by providing a deliverer, a person who would fight against their enemies and defeat them. Then there would be peace in the land, and the deliverer would rule over them well. God sent many deliverers to rescue the people. God did this again after He allowed the Midianites, a nearby enemy people group, to defeat the Israelites. The Midianites took all of the Israelites' crops for 7 years. The Israelites were so scared they hid in caves so the Midianites would not find them. Finally, they cried out to God to save them. There was an Israelite man named Gideon. One day, he was threshing grain in a hidden place so the Midianites would not steal it. The angel of Yahweh came to Gideon and said, "God is with you, mighty warrior. Go and save Israel from the Midianites." Gideon's father had an altar dedicated to an idol. The first thing God told Gideon to do was to tear down that altar. But Gideon was afraid of the people, so he waited until nighttime. Then he tore down the altar and smashed it to pieces. He built a new altar to God nearby and made a sacrifice to God on it. The next morning, the people saw that someone had torn down and destroyed the altar, and they were very angry. They went to Gideon's house to kill him. But Gideon's father said, "Why are you trying to help your God? If he is a god, let him protect himself." Because he said this, the people did not kill Gideon. Then the Midianites came again to steal from the Israelites. There were so many of them that they could not be counted. Gideon called the Israelites together to fight them. Gideon asked God for 2 signs so he could be sure that God was really telling him to save Israel. For the first sign, Gideon laid a sheepskin on the ground and asked God to let the morning dew fall only on the sheepskin and not on the ground. God did that. The next night, he asked that the ground be wet, but the sheepskin dry. God did that too. Because of these 2 signs, Gideon believed that God really wanted him to save Israel from the Midianites. Then Gideon called for soldiers to come to him, and 32,000 men came. But God told him this was too many. So Gideon sent home 22,000, all who were afraid to fight. God told Gideon that he still had too many men. So Gideon sent all of them home except for 300 soldiers. That night, God told Gideon, "Go down to the Midianite camp and listen to them talk. When you hear what they say, you will no longer be afraid to attack them." So that night, Gideon went down to the camp and heard a Midianite soldier telling his friend about something he had dreamed. The man's friend said, "This dream means that Gideon's army will defeat us, the Midianite army." When Gideon heard this, he worshipped God. Then Gideon returned to his soldiers and gave each of them a horn, a clay pot, and a torch. They surrounded the camp where the Midianite soldiers were sleeping. Gideon's 300 soldiers had the torches in the pots, so the Midianites could not see the light of the torches. Then all of Gideon's soldiers broke their pots at the same moment, suddenly revealing the fire of the torches. They blew their horns and shouted, "A sword for Yahweh and for Gideon!" God confused the Midianites, so that they started attacking and killing each other. Immediately, Gideon sent messengers to call many other Israelites. to come from their homes and help chase the Midianites. They killed many of them and chased the rest of them out of the Israelites' land. 120,000 Midianites died that day. This is how God saved Israel. The people wanted to make Gideon their king. Gideon did not allow them to do this, but he asked them for some of the gold rings that each of them had taken from the Midianites. The people gave Gideon a large amount of gold. Then Gideon used the gold to make a special garment like the high priest used to wear, but the people started worshiping it as if it were an idol. So God punished Israel again because they worshipped idols. God allowed their enemies to defeat them. They finally asked God for help again, and God sent them another deliverer to rescue them. This same thing happened many times. The Israelites would sin, God would punish them, they would repent, and God would send someone to rescue them. Over many years, God sent many deliverers who saved the Israelites from their enemies. Finally, the people asked God for a king like all the other nations had. They wanted a king who was tall and strong, and who could lead them into battle. God did not like this request, but he gave them a king, just as they had asked. Story 17. God's Covenant with David. Saul was the first king of Israel. He was tall and handsome, just like the people wanted. Saul was a good king for the first few years that he ruled over Israel, but then he became a wicked man who did not obey God. So God chose a different man who would one day be king in his place. God chose a young Israelite named David and began to prepare him to one day become king after Saul. David was a shepherd from the town of Bethlehem. At different times, David killed both a lion and a bear that attacked his father's sheep while David was watching them. David was a humble and righteous man. He trusted and obeyed God. When David was still a young man, he fought against a giant named Goliath. Goliath was a very good soldier. He was very strong and about 3 meters tall. But God helped David kill Goliath and save Israel. After that, David won many victories over Israel's enemies. David became a great soldier, and he led Israel's army in many battles. The people praised him very much. The people loved David so much that King Saul became jealous of him. Finally, Saul wanted to kill him. So David ran away into the wilderness to hide from him and his soldiers. One day, when Saul and his soldiers were looking for him, Saul went into a cave. It was the same cave that David was hiding in, but Saul did not see him. David went up very close behind Saul and cut off a piece of his clothing. Later, after Saul left the cave, David shouted to him to look at the cloth he was holding. In this way, Saul knew that David refused to kill him to become king. Sometime later, Saul died in battle, and David became king of Israel. He was a good king, and the people loved him. God blessed David and made him successful. David fought many battles, and God helped him defeat Israel's enemies. David conquered the city of Jerusalem and made it his capital city, where he lived and ruled. David was king for 40 years. During this time, Israel became powerful and wealthy. David wanted to build a temple where all the Israelites could worship God and offer him sacrifices. For about 400 years, the people had been worshiping God and offering sacrifices to him at the tent of meeting that Moses had made. But there was a prophet named Nathan. God sent him to tell David this: "You have fought in many wars, so you will not build this temple for me. Your son will build it. But still, I will greatly bless you. One of your descendants will rule as king over my people forever." The only descendant of David who could rule forever was the Messiah. The Messiah was God's chosen one, who would save the people of the world from their sin. When David heard Nathan's message, he thanked God and praised him. God was honoring him and giving him many blessings. Of course, David did not know when God would do those things. We know now that the Israelites would have to wait a long time before the Messiah came, almost 1,000 years. David ruled his people justly for many years. He obeyed God very much, and God blessed him. However, toward the end of his life, he sinned terribly against God. One day, David looked out from his palace and saw a beautiful woman bathing. He did not know her, but he found out that her name was Bathsheba. Instead of looking away, David sent someone to bring her to him. He slept with her and sent her back home. A short time later, Bathsheba sent a message to David saying that she was pregnant. Bathsheba's husband was a man named Uriah. He was one of David's best soldiers. He was away fighting in a war at this time. David called Uriah back from the battle and told him to go be with his wife. But Uriah refused to go home while the rest of the soldiers were in battle. So David sent Uriah back to the battle and told the general to place him where the enemy was strongest, so that he would be killed. This is what happened. Uriah died in battle. After Uriah died in the war, David married Bathsheba. Later, she gave birth to David's son. God was very angry about what David had done, so he sent the prophet Nathan to tell David how evil his sin was. David repented of his sin, and God forgave him. For the rest of his life, David followed and obeyed God, even in difficult times. But David's baby boy died. This is how God punished David. Also, until David died, some people in his own family fought against him, and David lost much power. But God was faithful and still did what he had promised David he would do for him, even though David had disobeyed him. Later, David and Bathsheba had another son, and they named him Solomon. Story 18. The Divided Kingdom. King David ruled for 40 years. Then he died, and his son Solomon began to rule over Israel. God spoke to Solomon and asked him what he wanted most that God should do for him. Solomon asked that God would make him very wise. This pleased God, so he made Solomon the wisest man in the world. Solomon learned many things and was a very wise ruler. God also made him very wealthy. In Jerusalem, Solomon built the temple for which his father David had planned and gathered materials. People now worshipped God and offered sacrifices to him at the temple instead of at the tent of meeting. God came and was present in the temple, and he lived there with his people. But Solomon loved women from other countries. He disobeyed God by marrying many women, almost 1,000 of them. Many of these women came from foreign countries and brought their gods with them and continued to worship them. When Solomon was old, he also worshipped their gods. God was angry with Solomon because of this. He said that he would punish him by dividing the nation of Israel into 2 kingdoms. He would do this after Solomon died. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam became king. All the people of the nation of Israel came together to accept him as their king. They complained to Rehoboam that Solomon had made them do a lot of hard work and pay a lot of taxes. They asked Rehoboam to make them work less. But Rehoboam answered them in a very foolish way. He said, "You say that my father Solomon made you work hard, but I will make you work harder than he did, and I will make you suffer worse than he did." When the people heard him say this, most of them rebelled against him. 10 tribes left him, only 2 tribes remained with him. These 2 tribes called themselves the Kingdom of Judah. The other 10 tribes made a man named Jeroboam to be their king. These tribes were in the northern part of the land. They called themselves the Kingdom of Israel. But Jeroboam rebelled against God and caused the people to sin. He built 2 idols for his people to worship. They no longer went to Jerusalem in the Kingdom of Judah to worship God at the temple. The kingdoms of Judah and Israel became enemies and often fought against each other. In the new kingdom of Israel, all the kings were evil. Many of these kings were killed by other Israelites who wanted to become king in their place. All of the kings and most of the people of the kingdom of Israel worshipped idols. When they did this, they often slept with prostitutes and sometimes even sacrificed children to the idols. The kings of Judah were descendants of David. Some of these kings were good men who ruled justly and worshipped God. But most of Judah's kings were evil. They ruled badly, and they worshipped idols. Some of these kings even sacrificed their children to false gods. Most of the people of Judah also rebelled against God and worshipped other gods. Story 19. The Prophets. God was always sending prophets to the Israelites. The prophets heard messages from God and then told them to the people. Elijah was a prophet when Ahab was king over the kingdom of Israel. Ahab was an evil man. He tried to make the people worship a false god named Baal. So Elijah told King Ahab that God was going to punish the people. He said to him, "There will be no rain or dew in the kingdom of Israel until I say it will rain again." This made Ahab so angry that he decided to kill Elijah. So God told Elijah to go into the wilderness to hide from Ahab. Elijah went into the wilderness to a stream where God directed him. Every morning and every evening, birds would bring Elijah bread and meat. During this time, Ahab and his army looked for Elijah, but they could not find him. There was no rain, so after some time the stream dried up. So Elijah went to another country close by. There was a poor widow in that country. She had a son. They had almost run out of food because there was no harvest. But still, the woman took care of Elijah. So God provided for her and her son, so that her jar of flour and her bottle of oil never became empty. They had food during the whole famine. Elijah stayed there for several years. After 3.5 years, God told Elijah that he would make it rain again. He told Elijah to return to the kingdom of Israel and speak with Ahab. So Elijah went to Ahab. When Ahab saw him, he said, "There you are, you troublemaker." Elijah replied to him, "It is you who are the troublemaker. You have abandoned Yahweh. He is the true God, but you are worshiping Baal. Now you must bring all the people of the kingdom of Israel to Mount Carmel." So all the people of Israel went to Mount Carmel. The men who said they spoke messages for Baal also came. These were Baal's prophets. There were 450 of them. Elijah said to the people, "How long will you keep changing your mind? If Yahweh is God, worship him. But if Baal is God, worship him." Then Elijah said to Baal's prophets, "Kill a bull and put the meat on an altar for it to be a sacrifice, but do not light the fire. I will do the same later, and I will put the meat on a different altar. Then if God sends fire on the altar, you will know that he is the real God." So the prophets of Baal prepared a sacrifice, but did not light the fire. Then the prophets of Baal prayed to Baal, "Hear us, Baal." All day long they prayed and shouted, and even cut themselves with knives. But Baal did not answer, and he did not send any fire. Baal's prophets spent almost the whole day praying to Baal. They finally stopped praying. Then Elijah put the meat of another bull on an altar for God. After that, he told the people to pour 12 huge pots of water on top of the sacrifice, until the meat, the wood, and even the ground around the altar were completely wet. Then Elijah prayed, "Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, show us today that you are the God of Israel, and that I am your servant. Answer me so that these people will know that you are the true God." Immediately, fire fell from the sky. It burned up the meat, the wood, the rocks, the soil, and even the water that was around the altar. When the people saw this, they prostrated themselves to the ground and said, "Yahweh is God. Yahweh is God." Then Elijah said, "Do not let any of the prophets of Baal escape." So the people captured the prophets of Baal and took them away from there and killed them. Then Elijah said to King Ahab, "Return immediately to your home, because the rain is coming." Soon the sky became black, and a heavy rain began. Yahweh was ending the drought. This showed that He is the true God. When Elijah finished his work, God chose a man named Elisha to be his prophet. God did many miracles through Elisha. One of the miracles happened to Naaman. He was the commander of an enemy army, but he had a bad skin disease. Naaman heard about Elisha, so he went to Elisha and asked him to heal him. Elisha told Naaman to go to the Jordan River and dip himself 7 times in the water. Naaman became angry. He refused to do this because it seemed foolish, but later he changed his mind. He went to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times into the water. When he came up from the water the last time, God healed him. God also sent many other prophets to the people of Israel. They all told the people to stop worshiping idols. Instead, they should act justly with each other and have mercy on each other. The prophets warned the people that they must stop doing evil and obey God instead. If the people did not do this, then God would judge them as guilty, and He would punish them. Most of the time, the people did not obey God. They often mistreated the prophets and sometimes even killed them. Once, they put the prophet Jeremiah into a dry well and left him there to die. He sank down into the mud in the bottom of the well. But then the king had mercy on him and ordered his servants to pull Jeremiah out of the well before he died. The prophets continued to speak for God even though the people hated them. They warned people that God would destroy them if they did not repent. They also reminded people that God promised to send them the Messiah. Story 20. The Exile and Return. The kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah both sinned against God. They broke the covenant that God had made with them at Sinai. God sent His prophets to warn them to repent and worship Him again, but they refused to obey. So God punished both kingdoms by allowing their enemies to destroy them. The Assyrians were another nation that became very powerful. They were also very cruel to other nations. They came and destroyed the kingdom of Israel. The Assyrians killed many people in the kingdom of Israel, took away everything they wanted, and burned much of the country. The Assyrians gathered together all the leaders, the rich people, and the people who could make valuable things. They took them to Assyria. Only some very poor Israelites remained in Israel. Then the Assyrians brought foreigners to live in the land. The foreigners rebuilt the cities. They married with the Israelites who were left there. The descendants of these people were called Samaritans. The people in the kingdom of Judah saw how God had punished the people of the kingdom of Israel for not believing and obeying Him. But they still worshipped idols, including the gods of the Canaanites. God sent prophets to warn them, but they refused to listen. About 100 years after the Assyrians destroyed the kingdom of Israel, God sent Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Babylonians, to attack the kingdom of Judah. Babylon was a powerful nation. The king of Judah agreed to be Nebuchadnezzar's servant and pay him a lot of money every year. But after a few years, the king of Judah rebelled against Babylon. So the Babylonians came back and attacked the kingdom of Judah. They captured the city of Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and took away all the treasures of the city and the temple. To punish the king of Judah for rebelling, Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers killed the king's sons in front of him and then made him blind. After that, they took the king away so he would die in prison in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar and his army took almost all of the people of the kingdom of Judah to Babylon, leaving only the poorest people behind to plant the fields. This period of time, when God's people were forced to leave the promised land, is called the exile. Even though God punished His people for their sin by taking them away into exile, He did not forget them or his promises. God continued to watch over his people and speak to them through his prophets. He promised that, after 70 years, they would return to the promised land again. About 70 years later, Cyrus, the king of the Persians, defeated Babylon. So the Persian Empire now ruled many nations instead of the Babylonian Empire. The Israelites were now called Jews. Most of them had lived their whole lives in Babylon. Only a few very old Jews even remembered the land of Judah. The Persians were very strong, but they had mercy on the people they conquered. Shortly after Cyrus became king of the Persians, he gave an order that any Jew who wanted to return to Judah could leave Persia and go back to Judah. He even gave them money to rebuild the temple. So after 70 years in exile, a small group of Jews returned to the city of Jerusalem in Judah. When the people arrived in Jerusalem, they rebuilt the temple and the wall around the city. The Persians still ruled over them, but once again they were living in the Promised Land and worshiping at the temple.